This is Stan Fischler, and this is the Power Play Break, the place to talk about pucks.
Hey everybody, it's Chris Riley here for the Power Play Break, the place to talk about pucks. We're joined today by the radio voice of the New York Rangers, Kenny Albert. Kenny, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
All right, let's get to it. Let's talk about your early days. We're going to go back to when you were like 5, 6 years old and the creation of your own radio station, WKGA Radio. And talk about how you came up with that whole idea.
Well, WKGA did not have many listeners, but there are still tapes that exist. That was a long time ago. Hard to believe, 4 decades ago now, when WKGA first came into existence. And for those who haven't figured it out yet, KGA are my initials, and I put the W in front of it like any radio or TV station in the east of the Mississippi, I guess. And my bedroom at the time was set up like a studio. I had a desk, like any normal kid's room would have, and then the bed and a TV on the other side. And I would do games off the TV, and I set up notebooks with the rosters and statistics, and those games became preserved on tape, and they would be played fictitiously, I guess, on WKGA.
Your early influence is probably your dad. Just to reference his dad is Marv Albert. Did you always want to go into sports like him from the time you were little? Did you always say, hey, that's what Dad does, I like to go do that as well? Or
I did. Not only him, but 2 uncles as well, his 2 brothers, Al and Steve. So I was around it from such a young age. It was really
the family business.
The family business. And, you have lawyers who go into the family business, their sons and doctors. So I felt the same way. It was never forced, was never told you have to do this. But it was always something I wanted to do from the age of 5 or 6. And I received the first tape recorder for my birthday when I was 5 or 6 and started doing the games, like we said, on WKGA. But, at any family dinner, any holiday, sports dominated the conversation. So it was just always something I loved. And here we are 40 years later.
Now, Dad takes you to work, and were you impressed? Were you awed at the fact that this is what Dad did, or were you kind of sitting there saying, well, it's the regular thing for me?
I think I was so used to it. I didn't really know any differently. Mm-hmm. So when I would go to work with him, it was going to WNBC, where he would do the 6 and 11 o'clock news. It was going to a Ranger game, going to a Knick game, and it was just how it was. I didn't know any different. So, certainly I would get excited when I would have the opportunity to meet certain players or coaches and be close to them. But it was really the world I grew up in, so I didn't know any differently. Now, it was, I would go to friends' houses and, their parents who worked regular 9 to 5 jobs, might be home for dinner every night, whereas he wasn't. But I loved, being able to go to the games and to go away on trips when I got a little older on weekends. So to me, it was 99.9% positive.
Talk about, what did you learn early on? I mean, you're 5, 6 years old, and somebody said you did stats one night at like 6 years old for your dad.
Yep.
What did you learn early on with that? I mean, what values did you learn of doing the job of being a sports announcer?
The night I did stats was in Washington in February of '74. For my 6th birthday, I went with him to Washington, and we went to see the White House, took pictures outside. We didn't go inside, but, went to the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, all the stuff that any, kid would do in Washington. And there was a Rangers-Capitals game that night. It was the first year that the Capitals played in the NHL at the old Capitol Center, which became the US Air Arena. And the game was delayed, believe it or not, 2 hours. The Ice Capades had been in town, and the ice was blue. They couldn't get the blue dye off the ice. So the game didn't start till about 9 o'clock. So whoever the statistician was for the radio broadcast had to leave at a certain time. Yeah. They had to be somewhere early the next morning, so I took over in the 3rd period. But so that was the first night I did stats. And now I forget what the original question was.
Going in there, were you kind of excited about it? I mean, what were you picking up on?
Right.
Picking up on watching Dad.
I think most of it was stuff that would sink in via osmosis. He wouldn't sit me down and say, do this or do that. I would just watch and observe. But the biggest thing I learned was the work ethic and the preparation. I would see how many hours would go into it. And even now, when I speak to kids, high school and college students who want to get into sportscasting, that's the one thing I emphasize, that you don't just show up at 6:59 for a 7 o'clock game and start talking. It's an entire week process for a football game, for example, for a hockey game. You're going to practice and you're doing a lot of reading and watching other games. So there is a lot of work that goes into it. So I think that's what I really picked up on from an early age, was the work ethic and how much time goes into it.
Now, speed up a little bit. Now your teen years, and now you become the official statistician for the Rangers, and you also start to write a little bit for the Rangers magazine. How exciting! You're in high school. I mean,
Right.
That's got to be really an exciting time for you.
Well, a lot of the writing I would do was in school for the school newspaper. Started writing for the school newspaper in junior high school, and in high school became the sports editor. In fact, one of my writers, I'm very proud to say that Tom Galletti, who covers the New Jersey Devils for the Bergen Record, was a good friend of mine in high school. Okay. And when I was sports editor, he got the bug to write some articles for me. So I guess I was his first boss and first editor. And now he's doing a great job, one of the top hockey writers in the NHL. So I did a lot of that stuff in school, and again, would tag along with him and keep the stats at the Ranger games, and got to know a lot of the people around the building. So they allowed me to write some articles for the game program, which was a lot of fun.
What was the best piece of advice that your dad gave you growing up? Like, what was the one thing? Like, dads always and parents always like to impart their wisdom, their life wisdom on their children. What was one thing that, like, Dad said to you, like, Kenny, this is one thing I'm going to tell you about this business that you need to always know?
I'm being honest when I say that I don't think there was really one piece of advice. We didn't really sit down a lot and talk about it, about the path that I was, hopefully going to take. I really think that most of it was just tagging along and watching, and maybe that was the way that he sent the message, just watch how I do it, I guess.
Yeah.
But there really wasn't, I can't remember one time where we sat down and he would start to teach or say, this is how you have to do something. It was really more via, tagging along, going on trips, and watching how he would do things.
Did Al or Steve, your uncles, ever give you any kind of advice? Or you ever like sit down and pick their brains, like say, well, Dad does this, but do you guys do it this way? I mean, sit down.
It might be strange, to hear, but not really. Again, I would go with them once in a while, not as often. They were also working in other cities at different times. Al was in Denver for a while, and Steve was out in San Francisco and Cleveland, and they both were in the New York area doing the Nets and Islanders and Devils at various points. But again, I always enjoyed watching them, and I remember in high school, we didn't have cable, believe it or not. I would go to a friend's house in 84, 85, 86, and Al was doing the Stanley Cup Finals on USA Network with Gary Green during the Edmonton-Philly series in 85 and 87, and Montreal-Calgary in 86. So I would certainly watch them a lot, but never
picked their brain. Yeah.
Never really picked their brain too often.
Now talk about, you're 21 years old, and you're going to do an NHL game. Most guys never get to that level that early. What was that like for you? All of a sudden, you're going to do a National Hockey League game on the radio. I mean, that had to be, like you're saying, to the back of your mind, this is going to be incredible. I've made the leap. I'm going to get this position. Or were you excited, nervous? I mean, how did you feel?
Very excited. What happened was during my college years at NYU, I had done some work and internships with Joel Blumberg, who was a producer at the time with Islander Radio. And he had hired me to do some pre- and post-game shows on WEVD. And again, I would take the tape recorder and sit up at the Nassau Coliseum and do games with the tape recorder. WKGA, 15 years later. And sent one of the tapes in to Joel. He passed it along to the folks at the Islanders, and there was an opportunity to fill in on 3 or 4 games during the 89-90 season, still in college, senior in college that year. And what happened was Jiggs McDonald, who was doing the TV, had to miss a couple of games, and Barry Landers would slide over from radio to TV.
Yeah.
So I filled in for Barry, and the first game was in Winnipeg, December 2nd, 89. And, I remember being excited, but felt that I was ready to do it. Maybe listening back wasn't as ready as I thought I was. But it was a tremendous experience, and actually, by having those tapes of the 3 or 4 games from the 89-90 Islander fill-in work, used those tapes to send around when college ended, and that's how I wound up getting the job with the Baltimore Skipjacks of the American Hockey League, having those NHL tapes to use to try and get a full-time job.
When we get back here in a minute on the Power Play break with Kenny, we're going to talk about his transition to the Baltimore Skipjacks and the American Hockey League.